Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Listening Lounge. My name is Nick Day and I'm CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, and we're specialist payroll and HR recruiters. Now, they say the quieter we are, the more we hear, and that listening is the secret to discovering the greatest of stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's fantastic guest. Today, I'm joined by Colm O'Cuinneain, General Manager of EMEA for Greenhouse Software, who work with top tech companies, including HubSpot, Docusign, Wayfair, and more, to make hiring better by reducing bias and essentially just streamlining the recruitment process. Now, a recent economic sentiment survey of over 1,000 UK employees found that despite a recession being inevitable, 56% did not anticipate that this would impact on their wages. In fact, it discovered that many are actually hoping to see further increases next year. Well, Colm believes that companies should use any downturn in the job market as the time to meaningfully invest in hiring strategies so they're ready and prepared for when they need to ramp up again. What do the words human resources mean to you?
I think that the world of human resources is changing rapidly away from the 20th century view of human resources as a compliance function. Colm, you haven't done your training. HR is looking for you to focusing more on the human side of HR, so the people side of HR. And I think that's massively been accelerated by the pandemic. So the pandemic has changed how companies view and value employees, where they work, and so on. And companies are rethinking their relationship with their employees, putting them at the center of everything they do. And ultimately, that's resulting in the emergence of a human-focused company. And, what we call in Greenhouse, we call them people-first companies. So focusing on people, prioritizing the needs of employees so that their organization can foster a more productive and a more engaged workforce. And ultimately, that leads to better business outcomes by essentially becoming people-first companies.
But I think we've seen, the world of personnel moving to HR. We're now seeing a lot more titles becoming chief people officer, for example, and people coming into those titles, really talking about why talent matters now and why we get our recruiting strategies right, and also what people first companies mean. I mean, your website hits you quickly. It's the future belongs to people first companies. But what does that really mean? The future belongs to people first companies.
Well, I suppose it's probably worth stepping back and giving a little bit of context to why we say that. First of all, despite what's happening externally, hiring remains very, very competitive. So, for example, where you are in the UK, if you remember back to September, when there was so much economic turmoil, at the same time, you had job numbers that came out that showed unemployment was at its lowest since 1974. So, a huge shortage of talent. Then if you look at the economy and, the economic makeup of a lot of modern economies, there's a shift from, manufacturing to more a services economy. So ultimately, that's a human capital focused economy. And then as I touched on earlier, the pandemic, that disrupted work massively. People exited the workforce and companies started to understand the importance of talent. So where they work, how they work, who they work for becomes really important from a talent perspective, but also what type of company that they work for, and the values alignment that company has with their identity. And that comes through in research that we've done. So, every couple of months we do candidate surveys. And in the most recent research, 91% of candidates believe that a healthy, diverse, inclusive company culture, that's really important to their decision-making about where they work. But then what also comes through in the research is they're looking for greater flexibility. So flexible hours. They're looking for transparent D&I commitment and efforts, and a clearer purpose driven company mission. So that's really coming through in the data. And I suppose what we see is that companies who prioritize those candidates' needs and adopt people first practices, they're going to win the war for talent. So ultimately, they view their people as a highly strategic asset. They view the HR function as a highly strategic function and not a HR function. And ultimately, they do this to create a critical advantage for themselves. So what does that look like? Well, it means that companies who are people first, they act with intentionality about purpose, about values, about culture, including D&I. And Nick, I suppose that may be table stakes for you, but I met somebody for coffee yesterday. They're working in France and they're working on a startup that's raised 30 million. And he's going like, I've met the CEO and I'm trying to do some consultancy with him. And, you know, he has no company mission, he has no company values, you know, so what might be table stakes maybe really isn't table stakes. You know, then they care about fair and equitable hiring as part of their competitive business strategy. What that allows them to do is, first of all, give everybody who engages with the company a fair shot at getting a job. And if you get a fair shot at a job, like, that can be life-changing for you and for the economic circumstances for your family. But as a company, you know, by being people first and taking that approach, that allows you to tap into more diverse talent pools as well. So it gives you a competitive advantage versus your competitors. They also focus on collaboration and employee experience. And that's become particularly important in a world where, you know, we could be working from, I'm in my kid's bedroom right now, you know, so if you think about how easy it is for me to shut my PC working for one company and open my PC working for another company. So it's really important that companies really build that connection to employee experience. And I suppose the last thing we see people first company do is leverage technology to drive human-centric employee engagement. So for me, there are the key elements to being a people first company.
There's a lot to pull out of that. I couldn't agree more with pretty much everything you've said, right? It's the world we're living in now, moving away from command and control into a world of culture, coaching cultures and psychological safety, right? But it's interesting because I guess the question I'd like to ask, pre-pandemic, a lot of businesses were compliance first. Post-pandemic, we seem to be companies wanting to get to more of a people first mentality. We all know that the global pandemic drastically altered the way people work, the way that people live their lives in a very, very short space of time. And it's kind of rapidly advanced technology in the way that we approach work now. Do you think we'd be having this conversation, though, if the pandemic hadn't come when it did? Do you think we're already on that pathway, but that pathway to be where we are now would have taken 10 years? Have we fast-tracked that? Or were we already on this kind of step change?
I think we were on the journey, but at a slower pace. So, for example, if you think about people first, guess what? You know, when I was in Oracle, for example, I worked for a fabulous leader who made sure that everybody in the organization had a development plan, that every quarter, you know, that every individual contributor with their manager, they updated that development plan and was built into career ladders and so forth. So I think in every organization, there are pockets of brilliance where somebody could get that, tap into that incremental 10 or 20% of, you know, extra energy and extra productivity, you know, by taking that people first approach. But I think it's a bit like hiring as well. So, you know, guess what? You know, in previous companies, I also adopted a structured hiring process, but it might have been more like individual managers doing something in a very good way, as opposed to doing it at scale. And I think the pandemic accelerated the requirements to do stuff at scale. So, for example, you know, companies have to move their hiring to digital. Guess what? You know, then you do need to step back and be very structured in how you hire somebody to make fair decisions, to make good decisions. Similarly, from an onboarding perspective, you know, one of my kids, I remember when I was in a previous company, said, okay, you've hired this person, what should you do? And my kids said, put them beside the smartest person in your team. That doesn't sort of work in this environment. You know, it's how do you create a very structured onboarding process so that, you know, a candidate or an employee can go, okay, my company has their stuff together, and it's doing that at scale. And for me, that's what's changed from a pandemic perspective. We've had to take individual best practices and do them at scale, as well as knowing that lots of people have exited the marketplace. So, for example, I was in Washington last week. The person that I was sitting beside retired at 57. He was going, actually, I just decided I'd had enough, and the pandemic, you know, made that happen. Hence, you know, when I go back to earlier, you know, data points like what happened in the UK in September, despite, you know, what was going on in terms of economically, there was still a massive shortage for talent. So I think all of those things combined sort of like accelerated a trend or a journey that we were on already.
I think one thing, we're going to have business owners listening to this that are going to be feeling like they're giving. You know, the more we give, the more people seem to ask for. It's a human trait, whether you mentioned your kids earlier, you know, if we spoil our children, they want more, and they see the value of that product or thing less each time they get something else, right? Because the value becomes less. So if we suddenly went from 9 to 5:30 command and control to suddenly giving someone the ability to come into work one day a week at 10 a.m., that'd be seen as a huge thing. We've gone the whole way now. There's full flexibility, people working from home. And what we're seeing in the world of recruitment is, and rightly so, employees are going to consistently say, now we want to look at a 4-day working week, or now we want this benefit or a little bit extra salary here. And at what point, what's the breaking point for the business owner listening to that who feel like, okay, I can do all these things. I want to get the top talent into my firm, but I also want to make sure I can afford it and I can offer the things and it doesn't break the back at the same time. Is there a breaking point? How far can we go with this?
So I think there are certain essentials. So for example, we have a customer support line. That support line has to be staffed for certain hours. Otherwise, we can't function as a business. So I think there are certain prerequisites that every organization has. But I'd always bring it back to, like, a lot of this is scaling best practices. So for example, at one stage in my career, I had a mother who'd just come back from maternity leave. And when her kid was sick, my view was, okay, if you need to work from home, that's fine. What I found by just behaving in a way that I would expect, my partner or my wife to be treated, that all of a sudden I got huge incremental loyalty, but also, people genuinely are goal orientated. So the work mightn't have been done by 5 o'clock, but it was done at a different time. And,
sure.
And ultimately you're able to tap into that productivity. And I think that's what's changed, is it's not 9 to 5 anymore. People might work 9 to 12:30. They might go to the gym for an hour. They're back. They work on later. But if you've the systems in place to measure and to manage people in a fair way, I think it improves the deal for everybody. You get better, more energized workers who can plan their lives around their work, and ultimately, that creates the atmosphere, the environment where they're going to stay with you for a much longer period of time.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode of The Listening Lounge. My name is Nick Day, and remember, every great conversation starts with great listening. Till next time.